Instead of trying to change the white man and your mind, make you accept us, we change the mind of the black man and make him accept himself. And as soon as he accepts himself, he'll solve his own problem. He won't be trying to force himself into your factory and into your bedroom and into your kitchen.
With no education, you have neo-colonialism instead of colonialism, like you got in Africa 9, like you got in Haiti. So what we're talking about is there has to be education in the program. That's very important. As a matter of fact, it's so important for us that a person has to go through 6 weeks of our political education before he can consider himself a member of the party, able to even run down ideology for the party. Why? Because if they don't have education, then they're nowhere. You dig what I'm saying? They're nowhere because they don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. You might get people caught up in the emotionless movement. You understand me? You might get them caught up in because they're poor and they want something. And then if they're not educated, they want more. And before you know it, they'll be capitalist. And before you know it, we have Negro imperialists.
Peace and Black Power family. It's your Harlem educator, author, and activist, the Black Liberation Coach, Brother Agyei Tyehimba. I just want to take a few moments to welcome you to Harlem Liberation School's YouTube channel. Harlem Liberation School was started in 2016 by myself and my queen, and we basically saw that there was a lack of foundational black political education going on in Harlem. We're not going to get up from under white supremacy without knowing how oppression works, how it affects and impacts in our community, the ways in which we internalize our own oppression and engage in self-defeating behavior and thinking, and our socio-political movements and our very important individuals and organizations throughout our history who played a leading role in fighting against and resisting and disrupting white supremacy. So Harlem Liberation School was founded as a black political education center for adults. Because education is not just relegated to children. Adults need education. It's those of us adults who maybe when we were kids did not get that foundational Africana studies of black political education. The things we need to know to be free and to fight effectively for our liberation. And so that's what we're here to do. We hope that you will come through, check us out, look at our videos, like them, comment on them, and share them. Peace and Black Power. Peace and Black Power family. It's Brother Agyei Tyehimba from Harlem Liberation School, where we teach black people to wake up, clean up, and stand up. We'd like to thank you for joining us this evening as we pivot around the discussion of ending or eliminating the problem of black miseducation. The problem of black miseducation. Now, we've been talking about black miseducation for decades, going back to Carter G. Woodson's phenomenal work, The Miseducation of the Negro. We've been talking about it for decades. Carter G. Woodson talked about it. Du Bois talked about it. Booker T. Washington talked about it. Marcus Garvey, Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Brother Malcolm X, and on and on and on. What we want to do today is discuss some of the background, some important information you should know to intelligently and effectively address this issue. Some background information you should know, a little bit of statistics, and we're going to get into ways to combat the issue of black miseducation, because the ultimate goal is not just to talk about it, but to resolve the problem, in our own image and interest. We have the Queen Bee is in the building. Queen Brenda Hilaire is greeting us with a peace and a black power, which we certainly appreciate. And we want to also say that if you are watching, let us know. Let us know you're here. Let us know where you're watching from. Shout us out. All right, family. Also, we want to remind you that in upcoming weeks, actually all the way through December, the entire rest of this year, Harlem Liberation School is doing its Hip Hop 50 series, where we have ordinary brothers and sisters like you and me who are not in the hip hop industry necessarily, who are not rich and famous, but who nevertheless participated in hip hop in some way or benefited from hip hop in some way. And we're going to have kind of an oral history done through Harlem Liberation School, where people talk about what hip hop meant to them and why hip hop is important, and some cautionary tales, some warnings, some critiques of hip hop. That said, let us get into it, family. Let us get right into it. Okay, we are talking about ending the terrible issue of Black miseducation. And I think one of the first things to frame it is that I agree with our ancestor, Brother Malcolm X, who said that education is our passport to the future. Tomorrow is promised to those that prepare for it today. Right? That's the entire quote. That quote has so impacted me that when we started Knowledge and Power Preparatory Academy, Middle School 215 in the Bronx, New York, 23 years ago, I insisted that this be the motto of our school because it reminds us of why we are here. It's very easy, family, to be in a space, forget why you're there. As a brother in his middle age years, I sometimes go to another room in my apartment and forget why I'm there. I forget, what did I come here to do? It's one of the easiest ways to fail, by the way, too, to forget why you're there. And with this motto, I knew that the students, the faculty, and the administration would constantly remember why we're in this middle school. We're here to get our passport to the future. We're here to get the education, the context, the networks, the skills, the qualities we need to navigate this world, man, right? And to go the places we need to go and to complete the assignments we need to complete. So that's the first thing. That's where I start. Education is our passport to the future. Before we begin, very important we understand this, because if you don't understand these 3 points, I think is going to sabotage our ability to move forward in this discussion. Number one, education is not just for children. Our entire village needs education, from the rooter to the tutor, from the cradle to the grave, family, from the babies to our little kids, to our preteens, to our adolescents, to our young adults, to our adults of whatever age. We all need education. It's just that we might need education with respect to different arenas or areas of life, but we all need it. It's not just for children, and we have to drill that in our heads, because if we don't, we're going to be missing out on upwards of 40 million people in our nation right here in the United States that aren't getting their educational needs met because they're not children. All right. Number two, education does not just take place in traditional school buildings. We have to get that out of our minds. Nor is education just the responsibility of traditional schools, right? Education in the African context, I know it occurs throughout our village, and it's the village's responsibility to educate the village, not the school. The school just takes the lead, right? But we're going to get into that. We have to have more of a holistic way of looking at this. And the third important point before we go any farther to frame this properly is that the vast majority of school-age Black youth, this is a real factual statistic, which means 85% of the Black school-age children in the United States are enrolled in public schools, quote unquote, the white man's schools, i.e., the white man's education. In other words, the enemy's educational system. 85% of our kids go to public schools. What does this mean? This implies, and actually is rather explicit, we cannot just rely on African-centered schools to solve the problem of Black miseducation. Why? Because African-centered schools, the real ones, the authentic African-centered schools, are independently run and independently funded. They don't accept money from the government, so the government can't come in and tell them what to do. That means they have tuition. That means right there, at most, only 15% of all the Black school-age children in our community will go there, and actually it's a much lower population than that. Most of our kids that go to private schools are going to parochial schools, which means Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, right? Or a private school that's not religiously affiliated, but it's also not African-centered. African-centered schools represent a very small minority of our kids that go there, right? Also remember that there's not enough African-centered schools created all around the country to service the vast majority of our kids. So just keep all this in mind when we have this discussion, because it will properly frame the discussion, and you'll get what I'm saying as we go on. Now, as we think about what is education, that's a good place to start. How would we define it? Well, certainly Paulo Freire, who wrote the very important revolutionary book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, famously wrote, quote, "Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world." So very simply, he says, education is either a project that helps people to conform and integrate into what already exists, or it helps them to become transformative agents of their reality, right? And to transform the world if they feel it needs transforming. And then, of course, Baba Fafuma, in his article, African Education in Perspective, gives a very good, I think, breakdown of African-centered education when he talks about the 7 cardinal goals of traditional African education, right? He says, number 1 is to develop the child's latent physical skills, to develop character, listen carefully, to inculcate respect for elders and those in positions of authority, to develop intellectual skills. Wow, that's number 4 on the list. That's not even number 1. But anyway, to acquire specific vocational training and to develop a healthy attitude towards honest labor or honest work. Not just people, I don't want to work. I'm working for. Is to get a healthy attitude. You're not working for nobody. You work for them. You're working for your family. You're working for your community, right? It's the way you look at it. To develop a sense of belonging and to encourage active participation in family and community affairs, right? Okay. So if you look at the way we're framing it, education is supposed to empower you. Remember, we're in an oppressive, colonized context too. Paulo Freire was writing, assuming that people were in a colonized context. So he's saying you either educate yourself to integrate into that colony or to transform that colony, right? And then the elder here is telling us this is what African education looks like as distinguished from Western education. Right? Western education, there's no big emphasis on respecting authority or elders. It's more emphasis on obeying the rules, certainly. But there's not that. Because if there was, you wouldn't go to schools and see kids cursing out teachers and their own parents like it was okay. Right? That's clearly not a value that's taught in school. And if it is taught, it's certainly not taught effectively. So if you look at those different points, it gives you a good understanding of what we mean by an education. What do we mean by education? So, by those 2 definitions, and if you throw in Malcolm X's concept of education being a passport to the future, I sadly have to report to you, in case you didn't know, that most of our students are grossly, woefully miseducated. And we need to show and prove that. So I'm not just, you don't think I'm just making stuff up. We have evidence of this. About 53% of Black youth say that they experience moderate to severe symptoms of depression. That's your psychological health. That's your mental health. In other words, the majority of our children are reporting that they have mental health issues, family. 2, 22% of black youth considered suicide just last year. Almost a third of our young people are thinking about taking their lives. We're going back to mental health issues, family. Third bullet point, 85% of black students lack the ability to do basic math. 84% of black students are functionally illiterate. And by this, what we mean is that they are unable to manage basic living and employment tasks. Counting money, decoding when it says that those jeans are 15 or 25% off, what does that mean? Right? Counting their change, time management, all of this goes back to math and reading, right? Okay. Right. And we can continue. I'm not here to demoralize you. I'm here to inform you and to give us some action steps to confront this and to eliminate this reality. And I should tell you, family, I worked in a school in New York City where it went from 5th to 8th grade, and none of those classes of students could read an analog clock. Every time they came to go to the bathroom, they had to fill out a pass, the time they were leaving, and then when they come back, the time they return to class. And every time they say, Mr. T, what's the time? I said, man, look at the clock. Right? I'm teaching the class. Look at the clock. And they keep asking me. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, they can't tell time. So I asked the whole class, tell me what time it is. Whoever could do it, I give $1. In every class I was in that day, nobody could do it. Right? Now, I taught 6th grade, but this turns out to be what was happening in the entire school. None of the students could look at an analog clock and tell you the time. I could not believe that. And then when I raised it with the other teachers, none of them seemed concerned. Oh, yeah, that's how it is. You know, they all into the digital. Nobody was concerned. So I really want you to grasp the gravity of this situation, what I'm telling you. We're not talking about your kid who's really bright, your kid got a scholarship, your kid went to here. We're not talking about the exception. We're talking about, as a general trend, this is where our black youth are. And it's saddening and it's upsetting. Let's continue. 7% of our 7% of our 4th graders read proficiently. That means 93% don't. Overwhelming majority. 14% of our 8th graders do math proficiently, which means I believe 86% don't. Our children are suspended from school at 3 times the rate of white students for the exact same offenses. So now we're talking about harassment, racism, right? We're talking brutality in many cases. If you ever seen a kid in middle school get handcuffed, as I have, and kind of whisked away like they're a grown man, like they're a seasoned criminal, it's ridiculous. But it's also talking about psychological warfare. What happens traumatically to a kid who's getting plastic handcuffs put on them and they're getting their head shoved and their body shoved into a police car? And they're sitting in a police cell, in a prison cell or in a holding facility waiting for their parents to come. What happens to our children traumatically with these type of experiences? And then lastly, our children are more likely than other students to be taught by new and inexperienced teachers. Well, this simply means that our kids are more likely to have incompetent teachers, family. More likely to have people who are brand new, they're still learning on the job, right? People whose knowledge base isn't particularly deep yet. Their reservoir of knowledge and references isn't deep and wide yet. So you can see how this is pretty disturbing. As we're looking up a few comments here, God bless black men, and you know it, and black women and black children. Absolutely. God bless the village. The Queen says she's surprised the numbers aren't higher. Thank God. Oh, wow. Yeah, you're right. And thank God they're not. And the Queen says, yes, all things considered, this is very disturbing. And she correctly points out when I'm talking about how they're arresting some of our kids in prison, in school, grade school, that is referred to as the school to prison pipeline. Many sociologists, of which I'm one, believe that that practice conditions our young people for lives of criminality, conditions them to expect such outcomes, makes it easier, if you will, for them to meet those type of outcomes. So this is not looking good, family. As Brother Deruba bin Wahad told me recently over the phone, he said, brother, things ain't looking too good for the home team. And we're the home team. Let's move on. Let's get into solutions. Family, I was raised to be analytical and theoretical, but that we're always doing that, not for knowledge's sake, not to be in some spelling bee, not to show off, not just to say I know more than you. We're doing the theory, we're going through this analysis, we're doing experimentation so that we ultimately can solve the problem that we see. That's why we're doing it, right? Okay, so let's go to some solutions. And I wrote a more scholarly article on this. When I can dig it up, I'm going to share that with the community as well. First of all, we have to frame the issue properly. I told you already, I think we went over this actually. I may have put it into the front of the presentation. But to reiterate, education is not just for children, it's for the entire village. Education doesn't just occur in schools. It's not just the responsibility of schools. It occurs throughout our village, and therefore it is a village responsibility to educate our children. Solutions. I'm suggesting humbly that we have to create and support already existing African-centered schools. I have pictured here in the slideshow 2 different schools. One on the left is Freedom Home Academy, now known as Freedom Home Academy International in Chicago. I believe Brother Marcus Klein, who is the I guess the proprietor, the principal, the director, has a few of them now. So it's now known as Freedom Home Academy International. And they do wonderful work. I had Brother Marcus Klein on a show, and we went into one of his classrooms live, man. And they're different ages. It's really different how he does things there. They were different ages in one class, and they were so sharp and so engaged and so bright and had such wonderful questions. You know, it was beautiful to see it. And to the right of that picture, we have our brother Walimu Bomani Baruti of the famous Baruti couple with Sister Mama Ya Baruti, headquartered with Akoba Institute in Atlanta. And you see him in a picture where he's teaching his students. It's a community homeschool. They're doing wonderful work. And they've been around for about 23 years themselves. So I'm giving you examples of the African-centered schools, right? But remember, most of our people won't even walk by an African-centered school in the course of their work, in the course of their week. Because in most cities, we don't have African-centered schools, right? And in smaller cities, a lot of times we definitely don't have African-centered schools. And there's not enough to facilitate all of our children. 85% of our kids go to public schools. So this is part of the solution. But some of us are like, African-centered schools, and don't realize, man, this education problem is wide and broad. Take a multi-layered approach, right? So it means African-centered schools, we should create them, and we should support those that exist, but that's not enough. What else must we do, in my humble opinion? We should create and support after-school programs. After-school programs are important because they help to prevent youth from getting involved in using or selling drugs and in unsafe sexual activity. They also provide kids a safe haven, a place that's safe and structured, where they're being supervised, by presumably caring adults, while their parents may be at work. So after-school programs help to reduce what we used to call the occurrence of latchkey children. You may have heard that term. Also, these after-school programs actually supplement what students learn in school, so they help them academically. They have tutoring services. They help them with their reading and the math. They help them depending on the type of after school program, they help them to be culturally connected, and they help them to be socially and emotionally healthy. Now, these after school programs can be African centered themselves, right? Or if they're not African centered, they can just be good Black people who know what they're talking about, love the kids, and expose them to beautiful and life sustaining things, right? So you see now we got two solutions. It's not one. It has to be a multi-layered approach. We can also create or support rites of passage programs. Now, rites of passage programs are similar to after-school programs in the fact that they're extracurricular. They're outside the curriculum of school. They're outside of traditional school. But they're not quite just after-school programs. These are very specific sort of after-school programs. Rites of passage programs teach and expose our youth to the qualities and the skills and the experiences and that they're going to need to become empowered Black adults, people that's going to be part of the solution. Ain't going to be another problem in the community. Ain't going to be somebody's burden. Ain't going to be beating up on somebody in the community. Ain't going to be raping and robbing and running amok in the neighborhood. Taking and not replenishing. These are going to be Black people that the youth look up to, that are working, that are contributing, that are making things more beautiful and more peaceful and more effective, right? In this picture, you see it's a picture of a very famous Rites of Passage program here in Harlem, New York, the Blue Nile Rites of Passage program. And it's been around for decades. I know at least since the 80s. And they're headquartered in one of our churches. Right? Now we're gonna get into these other parts of the village. See how the village shows up and shows out? The church steps up and says, you know what? We see a deficit of men in our community. A lot of men are dead. A lot of men are in prison. A lot of men are out of their minds. So we got to do something for these boys so they know what a man look like, walk like, talk like, how he chooses, how he moves effectively and lovingly, right? So this is what they do. This is coming from Abyssinia Baptist Church. My historians know that is the church famously pastored by the late great Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the politician, and Reverend, and also his father, Adam Clayton Powell Sr. All right. So create and support rites of passage programs. We have a brother in the community named Kamal Ptah, who's one of our leading experts. You can look up Brother Kamal Ptah, Ptah, and he can help you craft the rites of passage program in your city, specific to the needs and the desires that your community has for your children and youth. So yet, this is a third component of how we can end Black miseducation. Wait a minute, we're not done. We can create and support liberation schools. Now, liberation schools traditionally were kind of a spinoff of freedom schools. Freedom schools emerged in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. And these were places that taught children and adults things like reading. Remember, we're coming off a time where there was great illiteracy in our community, right? So a lot of times the adults couldn't read. When they're going on these different civil rights campaigns, they would go from city to city. They realized, wow, there's a lot of the adults are not literate. So what did they do? They teach everybody separate? No, they brought them in to one space, and some of the kids would be there, and their parents sometimes would be there, both learning how to read, do math, and also learning some of the skills that they would need to be really good civil rights soldiers in terms of the civil rights movement, right? Now, liberation schools, the way that at least I see them now, are organizations or institutions in our community that teach foundational Black political education and or Africana studies to community members, young and old. In this particular slide, I have, I'm shamelessly plugging Harlem Liberation School. And those are 4 different digital flyers of different events. Brother Shep, who's a former Black Panther, was speaking about, I believe, political prisoners. Mama Yabaruti was talking about a number of things. Sister Elena Porter was dealing with nation building. And I think the other picture is like a group shot of us when we had a book signing event. So the thing about these are that these are community-based, community-run. They shouldn't be getting a lot of money from any money from white folk. And these are beautiful because they're typically held in Black-owned businesses. Where we were at this time was in an art studio that was owned by a former college classmate of mine and her husband, who opened up their space to us and allowed us to use it. And in return, we gave them a love donation every time that we used the space, right? So liberation schools do not have to be, and usually are not, in a traditional school building, family. You can do these, and if your church is a type of church where your pastor or whoever say, yeah, you could open up to the community. You can have a liberation school right in your church. You can have a liberation school in a community center. You can have a liberation school in a Black-owned business that has the space. So in a Black-owned bookstore is a perfect place to have a liberation school, because some of the materials that you might be using might be right in the bookstore. People can support the Black-owned bookstore and support the community project of liberation schools at the same time. These are really good, but these teach the things you're not going to learn in school. Our social political movements, the pioneering theorists and practitioners of Black nationalism, of Pan-Africanism. They're going to teach leadership training, how to organize the community. Wonderful stuff. Liberation schools are stuff you need to be liberated. So that's yet a fourth component of how to end our miseducation. Wait a minute, we're not done. We also should be thinking about creating and involving a village educational network. What do I mean? Well, I have pictures here. One says Black-owned businesses. One is supposed to be a school, right? One looks like a volleyball team. One looks like they're in a church. What we're trying to convey here is that we need to organize a coalition or alliance, a network of businesses, our places of worship, our community centers, our athletic teams, our community organizations, in one network that meets semi-regularly, that addresses the issues of raising money and addresses how do we approach education. Should we create a liberation school? Should we create a rites of passage program? What existing African-centered schools can we support financially? And should we create an African-centered school in our city? That's what this network would do. But just by having these different components of the village, what happens? You now have access to the village's money, their community space, their expertise, right? So coaches, athletic coaches and teams are often overlooked politically. Here in New York, we got the Rutgers tournament in basketball. You got a team that's called the Gauchos. You got a Riverside Church had a big team. All these teams, and people didn't think of them as political centers. But being that they're in the community and our children are part of these athletic networks, those are places they can get involved. They should be in your network. Why? Because coaches can reach children and youth in a way that other people can't. They can talk a language that young people understand, and because they have a built-in reward punishment system, kids listen to coaches. What is that? You don't play. Oh, you gonna talk back to me? Are you gonna come late to practice? You gonna miss practice? Okay, no problem. You don't play. Built in, right? Kids understand those type of things. The denial of their empowerment, their lack of inclusion, their inability to show what they know, demonstrate. They understand that. The long lectures, they don't understand it, but that they understand. Sitting on the bench when they practice all week or two for that game gets through to them. And to have coaches on that team is important. Pastors on that team, places of worship. You can use now, because they're in your network, you can use some of their community space, right? You got teachers involved and schools may be involved. So now you're privy to what's going on in the school system. Maybe you could use their copiers. Maybe you could use some of their papers, some of their classrooms. I hope I'm getting across you're feeling what I'm saying. You got to build networks to solve this problem. It's a village problem. It's not a school, parent, or child problem. If we think of it that way, we can solve it, family. And family, that is basically the end of the presentation. We talked about what education is, what it should do or produce. We framed it as it is a passport to the future because tomorrow belongs to the people that prepare for it today, Brother Malcolm told us, and he's right and exact. And so when we looked at those statistics were particularly troubling because it means that we're not prepared for the future. It means that in the future we can expect, unless we make some radical interventions, such as those that I propose in this broadcast, there's going to be trouble. There's trouble on the horizon, family. And with the development of artificial intelligence and with the development of nanotechnology and all of these things, more and more companies are outsourcing jobs. They're hiring people from entirely different countries. I don't know if you're aware of that, to come here and work. Partly because they're racist, partly because those other countries don't have certain labor laws, right? They can pay them less, they can mistreat them easier. And if we can be honest, the sad truth is that some of our kids, our young adults are not prepared to do the basic work that needs to be done in some of these businesses. We have the power. We can complain about the white man all day. I never let the white man off the hook, ever. However, I also understand that should be 10% of what I do, calling out what the white man does. 90% of what I do or more should be putting in the work to undo what he has done, to thwart his intentions to subjugate us, and to build the structures, the institution, the governing system, the agricultural system, the housing systems that we need so that our people can be self-determined. Because I can certainly get up here toward the white man all day, but that's not the play. The major play for us is doing the work necessary so that our conversations slowly but surely stop even including the white man. I want to see we get today. We don't even reference him. Huh? Not even in your mouth. His name ain't in your mouth. You ain't constantly talking about what he did. Did you see what they did? No, we ain't seen what they did because we talk about what we doing. And our conversations may evolve to the point where we say, did you see that militia beat up those 20 white people that was trying to? Yeah, that may be the conversation. Did you see that new law that our government of black men and women created? Did you see that new? Yeah, that's what the conversation has to be. Right now, our conversation is that of victims because we're constantly victimized and there seems to be no place of refuge. So yes, we're talking like people who are victimized, but we can change that by not being victims any longer. Right? And so when we're talking about these things, family, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about how do we take charge of our lives individually and collectively. And I think we have wonderful people in our communities, right on our blocks, in our neighborhoods, that we are underestimating. We are not appreciating their value in the work they do. And we need to start building with them. And we're going to find we don't have community spaces, too expensive. Yes. But maybe there's somebody that owns something in your community that would say, hey, I'll let you do your Liberation School here. We could do fashion shows. We could do art exhibits. We could do fundraisers. You never know unless you engage the people. So I'm putting a call to action, family, to take what we went over today seriously. Do your own research and look around your communities and see how can we become people who end the issue of black miseducation. How can we get involved in this fight to make sure that not just our babies, but our aunts and uncles and grandparents, ourselves and our kids can be better equipped to navigate this world and to bend the world in our image and interests. You can only do that if you have knowledge and you have power, family. And that's what we're attaining to get. That's what we're trying to get so that we can practice self-determination. Family, if there are no questions or comments, I'm going to leave it right there because I think that I have basically said what I wanted to say in a nutshell. And I'd like to humbly ask, you're watching on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, please, family, could you subscribe to the channel, help us to reach more Africans, new Africans? Thank you so much. And with that said, I'm going to bid you all a beautiful evening. Let's work together. Let's figure this out, family. Peace and Black Power. See you next time.